against his own wishes, he was ordered to serve in what was supposed to be a civilian post of custodian of California archives from March 1850 until he left California in 1851. These archives included records of Spanish and Mexican governments in California, as well as mission records and land titles. Eventually, Canby had some knowledge of the Spanish language, which came in handy during this period. The Filson Historic Society in Louisville holds what it appears to be a document written by Canby in his own hand in Spanish, in which he identifies himself as Eduardo Ricardo S. Canby. In 1851, he was assigned as Adjutant General to the office in Washington, D.C. In March of 1855, he was promoted to the rank of Major. That would have been a permanent promotion of the 10th Infantry. He served during the Utah Wars. And during this period, Canby crossed paths with a West Point graduate, Captain Henry Hopkins Sibley. When the captain was court-martialed and Canby served on the panel of judges, Sibley was acquitted. Subsequently, Canby wrote an endorsement for a teepee-like army tent that Sibley had invented. Both officers were later assigned to Fort Garland, New Mexico, where Canby coordinated a campaign against the Navajos in 1860. The Navajo Expedition, as it was called. Commanding Sibley in a futile attempt to capture and punish the Navajos for depredations against the livestock of settlers. The campaign ended in frustration, where Canby and Sibley rarely so much sighted a Navajo, and then only at a considerable distance. So they were quite frustrated with that war with the Navajo Indians in that area. It's interesting that he served with Captain Sibley at this time, because when the Civil War came out, Sibley became a Confederate general, and they were opposed to one another. So it was interesting that they had this period where they were together in the earlier part. When the Civil War broke out between the states in 1861, the U.S. Army had only 4 line generals. 3 of those were 70 years of age and veterans of the Napoleonic period. About 1 in 3 American professional officers chose to serve in the Confederacy. Sibley was one of them. At the start of the Civil War, Canby was in command of Fort Defiance, New Mexico Territory, and he was promoted to colonel of the 19th U.S. Infantry on May 14, 1861, following a month and he became the commander of the Department of Mexico. And then at that time, he was subsequently defeated by the Confederate Brigadier General Henry Hopkins Sibley on February 1862 at the Battle of Val Verde. Canby's troops eventually forced the Confederates to retreat to Texas after the Union's strategic victory in the Battle of Glorieta, G-L-O-R-I-E-T-A, Glorieta Pass. Glorieta, okay. And recombining the forces he had early divided allowed them to reach Texas. And shortly after the failure of the Confederate invasion of northern New Mexico, Canby was relieved of his command and reassigned to the east. However, Canby was promoted to Brigadier General on March 31, 1862. His achievement in New Mexico had largely been his planning and overall defense strategy. He was an opponent of Sibley. Both Sibley and Canby had limited resources when they were in New Mexico. And though Canby was a little bit better supplied, he saw that defending the entire territory from every possible attack strategy would stretch his forces too thinly. So realizing that Sibley had to attack along the river, especially since they were going through a massive drought in New Mexico, Canby made the best use of his forces, only defending against two possible scenarios: an attack along the Rio Grande or an attack by the way of Pecos of the Canadian rivers. Moreover, the later defensive forces could easily be shifted to protect the Fort Union if the enemy attacked by way of the Rio Grande, which they did. Canby also took the initiative of persuading the governors of both New Mexico and Colorado to raise volunteer units to supplement the regular army forces. And the Colorado troops proved very helpful in both battles of Valverde and Glorieta. It was Sibley's campaign to win or lose, and in spite of the occasional superior soldiering of the Confederate troops, Sibley's sluggishness and vacillation in executing an extremely risky plan led to his inevitable defeat. One of the things that occurred is I remember reading that Canby had found that a supply train was coming to supply the Confederate soldiers, and they confiscated the supply train, so the Confederates were basically without provisions. So that was one of the reasons they retreated back to Texas. And their goal in the Battle of New Mexico was to try to make it to the gold fields in California. This is what the Confederates were trying to do. And Canby basically stopped that movement of the soldiers that was run by Sibley. In January 1863, Canby was assigned a special duty in the War Department, working at the office of the Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanley, for 14 months, except for a 4-month period that he was sent to New York. Canby became commanding general of the city and harbor of New York on July 17, 1863, following the New York draft riots. The Union Conscription Act required all able-bodied males 20 to 45 to serve in the military, but those who were able to pay the government $300 or furnish an acceptable substitute were excused. This provoked nationwide disturbances that were most serious in New York City, where for 4 days, July 13th to 16th, 1863, there occupied large-scale bloody riots, costing the lives of as many as 1,000 people and an estimated $2 million in damage. Canby's assignment was affect the day after the riots, and after the riots were quelled, and he remained at the post until November 9th, and not only restarting the draft, but overseeing a prisoner of war camp in the New York harbor. In May of 1864, Canby was promoted to Major General and assigned to command the military division of West Mississippi, which includes the Gulf states. On November 6, 1864, shortly before his 47th birthday, General Canby was shot by a guerrilla sniper while aboard the gunship USS Cricket on the White River in Arkansas. His wound was a painful gunshot to the upper thigh. He arrived at home that day of his birthday, and Louisa immediately put him to bed and nursed him back to health during the next month. Canby, later in the spring, commanded the Union forces assigned to conduct the campaign against Mobile, Alabama, in the spring of 1865, culminating in the Battle of Fort Lakely, which led to the fall of Mobile in April of 1865. Canby accepted the surrender of Confederate forces under General Richard Taylor at, Citronelle, forgive me for my pronunciation, on May 14, 1865, and those under General Edward Kirby Smith west of the Mississippi River on May 26, 1865. On July 28th, Canby was promoted to Brigadier General. Now, this would have been a permanent promotion. Canby was generally regarded as a great administrator, but opinion is mixed as to whether or not he was a great warrior. Ulysses S. Grant thought that he was not aggressive enough. In a telling incident, Grant sent Canby in order to destroy the enemy's railroads, machine shops, and so forth. 10 days later, Grant reprimanded him for requesting men and materials to build railroads. I wrote urging you to destroy the railroads and machine shops, not to build them, Grant said pointedly. The story is instructive regarding Canby's character. Although he could be a destroyer when he felt he had to be, he clearly preferred the role of a builder. He was an expert in the minute detail of administration. If someone had a question about the Army regulations or even the constitutional law affecting the military, Canby was the man to see. Grant himself came to appreciate him in peacetime, once complaining vigorously that President Andrew Johnson proposed to assign Canby away from the capital, where Grant considered him irreplaceable. Grant later recalled that General Canby was an officer of great merit. He was naturally studious and inclined to the law. There having been an army but a few, if any, officers who took as much interest in reading and digesting every act of Congress and every regulation for the government and the Army, his knowledge gained in this way made him the most valuable staff officer. He was exceedingly modest officer, though of great talent and learning. His character was pure and his talent and learning was great. Another government official commended Canby as being very active, but his work makes no show because he is conducted too quietly and without ostentation. Canby is a tall man and thoughtful and a kind face, speaks little and to the point, thoroughly a soldier, and his manner is very modest and unassuming, and sometimes even embarrassed. His post-war assignments. After the Civil War, Canby served as commander of the various military departments in the South, remaining in charge of Louisiana from 1864 to 1866. In August 1867, he was appointed commander of the 2nd Military District, comprising the North and South Carolina. He took command of the 5th Military District in November of 1868. There he focused primarily on the reconstruction of Texas. He left Texas for Virginia, the 1st Military District, in April 1869 and served there until July 1870. Each of these postings occurred during the Reconstruction and put Canby at the center of conflicts between the Republicans and the Democrats, whites and blacks, state and federal governments. New state constitutions were either being written, ratified, or put into effect in each district that he commanded. And he could not help but offend one side or the other, and often both. Nevertheless, Canby was described by many as vigorous and firm, but just. Even political opponents like Jonathan Worth, governor of North Carolina, admitted that Canby was sincere and honest. In July of 1870, Canby was awarded a doctorate of law, honorary degree by the Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. In August, he was promoted to command the Department of the Columbia in the Pacific Northwest. One of the problems he soon faced was with the Modoc tribe, which had previously lived in Northern California, had been compelled to live on the same reservation in Oregon with the Klamath tribe, with whom they did not